I think we are going to get ourselves started, and we will allow folks to catch up as they need to. So good evening, everyone. I suspect, looking at the list of people, most of you know me, but just in case there's someone who does not, I am Gordon Rankin, the conference minister, your conference minister for the New Hampshire Conference of the United Church of Christ. And we welcome you to this evening's roundtable, kind of a unique roundtable that we've done on ministry in the community. You will find that this arises out of the theme scripture that we are using for this year's annual meeting. I will say a little bit more about that in a moment. Let me start by telling you we switched the format in which we were doing tonight's roundtable this afternoon, because by our registration we may have up to 79 different attendees, not including our panelists today. And this format allowed us to better utilize this. Those of you, and I suspect it's going to be all of you, because you would have registered this through the annual meeting registration, will be with us on Saturday. This will be the same format we are using then. And we're going to actually conduct this in some similar ways to what we'll do then. So in the second half of our evening, we'll be inviting questions from all of you who are attending this time. We will have you write your questions in the question and answer box down on the bottom of your screens. If you're on a laptop or PC, perhaps elsewhere if you're on a phone or iPad, there's a little piece that says Q&A. And if you type your question in there, your questions will remain for us to scroll through, and we can ask them of our panelists. If you have a particularly complicated question, we may invite a couple of you to write that, not the whole question, but that you have a complicated question in the Q&A, and we will actually promote you so you can ask that face-to-face as we go through. That's also something that we could use to practice for going into the annual meeting. So I would like to pause at this moment and remind us that we are recording this roundtable. Our roundtable will be posted on the annual meeting website for folks to watch afterwards. All of you who are attendees, because you signed up to our registration system, have given us permission to use this. And for the most part, most of your faces won't be on this anyway. But I do need to pause and ask our panelists, since we know that your faces will be on this, if it's okay for us to use this video for publication on the conference website. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Excellent. I was hoping that was true. So friends, let us pause at this time and I will introduce our panelists. We are actually expecting two others to join us as the evening goes on. And we will introduce them as they can come in and you can see them face to face. But we'll start with the three folks we have with us this evening. First, from the Stratham Community Church and speaking about Seacoast Family Promise, we have Judy George.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
From the Gorham Congregational Church, United Church of Christ, and speaking about their drive-by blessings, we have the Reverend Bill Jones.
Hi, good to be with you. And we're the church at the bottom of the hill that Horton Center is on top of. Good to be here with you.
And from the United Church of Jaffrey, speaking about their gun violence vigil and the Sacred Ally Quilt Project, we have the Reverend Mark Koyama.
Hello, everyone. It is indeed an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. As I said, we will introduce our other couple panelists in an appropriate moment when they join us. Before we step into hearing about these different ministries in the community, we do want to just refresh you with our theme scripture for annual meeting, which speaks to us directly about doing ministry in the community. And so I invite you to hear these words from the 58th chapter of Isaiah, the 9th through 12th verses. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and the Holy One will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and the gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall rise up the foundation. Let's try this again. We'll do the last verse one more time. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall rise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to live in. So we are going to start by hearing from our various churches about the ways in which they are involved in ministry in their community. And we're going to start with Judy talking about how the Stratham Church has been involved, as I understand it, for a good long time with Seacoast Family Promise.
They have been. Thank you, Gordon. So I just want to say, when I moved to Stratham, what drew me to the Stratham Community Church and to the UCC was this idea of church in the community and just be the church. I just love that phrase, and I feel the UCC and all of the churches involved do that and live that, and I really appreciate that. I've raised my kids with that notion. And starting young, Stratham had a variety of opportunities for folks to be the church, to be involved. And Seacoast Family Promise is certainly one of them. They have been around in our community since 2003. Seacoast Family Promise is an affiliate of Family Promise, which is a national organization that has 200 affiliates in 41 states, began, I believe, a church in Connecticut. And the idea was that during the course of a week, many of our church buildings are underutilized. And wouldn't it be amazing to be able to house families experiencing homelessness in those church buildings? And it grew from that idea. So in Seacoast Family Promise, we serve families experiencing homelessness. So the family can be a single parent or a mom and dad, or two moms, two dads, or mom and grandma, but there needs to be a child under the age of 18 to be considered part of our program. Because we do house in faith communities, it is a drug-free and alcohol-free program, and we do criminal record checks. So families have to commit to this program. And it's a big commitment because it's a program. It's not necessarily just a shelter. The families in this program are taught management, household management, how to find jobs, how to, parenting skills, etc., while they're in this program. And they have to save money, and the goal, of course, is to achieve sustainable independence through the program and through this community-based response. So within Seacoast Family Promise, there are 10 host communities, faith communities. So those are the faith communities that house the families during the week. And then there are also partner faith communities that work with those host churches. So the families live in the faith communities during the week. Now, this is all pre-COVID, of course. I'll talk a little bit about how we've changed our model. But they would live in those faith communities, arriving on Sunday through the following Sunday. And while in a church, volunteers from that faith community are involved in preparing and bringing meals, hosting from 5 to 8 p.m., and then another set of hosts overnight until 7:30, 8 in the morning. During the day, the families, lots of times go to work, go to school, live their lives, but we also operate a day center in Exeter, New Hampshire, where they get their case management, comprised of a social worker, development coordinator, our executive director, and a day center manager. So that's where that's their home. That's, you know, their daytime home. And then in the
Hi,
evening,
I'm on a national Zoom call, sorry.
and then in the evening, they go back to those churches. And they rotate every week. You know, part of the idea is we don't want them to get too comfortable in one place. I mean, we want it to be challenging, and we want people to commit to the work involved. The amazing thing is the community-based response. During the course of a year, you know, 1,700 volunteers, hard to believe in these little small towns, but, you know, there are 20 different faith communities involved. So thousands of hours of volunteer services. We have corporate volunteers that get involved, a day of services. We have adoptive families for Thanksgiving and Christmas. We have an after program. So once the families kind of go through the program, they're still connected to us, and we have a pretty involved after program. So folks can kind of get what they need. If they're finding themselves struggling, there's a place that they know that they can go. So that's been very successful for us. In the last 7 years straight, we've had 100% of our families have gone out into the community and have been independent and stayed independent, and we're proud of those statistics. So that's kind of the summary of the program. I've been on the board for 4 years. I've been a volunteer for 13, 14 years. I served as also one of the church coordinators, coordinating volunteers for our host weeks. And that got me kind of more involved, and then jumped in on the board. So COVID, of course, has brought some challenges. I remember school teacher, and I got a call in the middle of my school day from the coordinator from the church, kind of the weekend that we all shut down, and their churches were shutting down, and kind of one by one, the churches were shutting down. And we didn't quite know what we were going to do with the program, but we knew we had families that we needed to take care of, and they depended on us. We had an amazing volunteer who had an apartment, and he jumped right on that and allowed a family to move into the apartment. We turned the day center into housing for the families. We had also just purchased the building next to our day center in Exeter for 2 lower income apartments for some former guests, and we turned those into housing, and we were able to get through that difficult transition. And then we also had 2 of our host sites volunteer, one their church, and the families lived there for a couple of months. And now we're in the middle of a transition. We're about to make an announcement, but we do have a long-term plan that will not involve the rotation of the churches. That's called a rotation model when they go from church to church. The next year, we're going to stick with a static site. The families will be in one place until the churches are ready to kind of open up the doors and host once again. So it's been a challenge, but we have never shut our doors for our families. Our families are amazing. Our volunteers are amazing. And the community is super supportive to the program, and we appreciate all of that.
Thank you, Judy. We are going to go from what was this longer term established mission ministry in the community to one that was brought about in response to the pandemic this year. And so I'm going to ask Bill Jones to tell us about their drive-by blessings in Gorham.
Sure. How's my sound? Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you pretty well.
Okay, good. You know, one of the challenges for me when I hear someone talking is I'm thinking about what they're saying too. So I'm thinking of, as you talked about, rotating through this time, sort of, we've all seen those church calendars that kind of, they're circular and you rotate through the year. And we kind of started our year like most places, you know, you came through January, February, and we were heading toward Lent when suddenly we had to close. And we're up in the North Country here. We're in the upper third of New Hampshire. Of course, if you know where Horton Center is, you know where this is. And so we saw the COVID closings coming up the state. And when they got to Plymouth, we thought, okay, we're probably going to be closing next week. And so sure enough, about the middle of March, then we closed with everybody else up here. And we went online immediately that same week and have had a devotional online every week since then. We were coming to Holy Week, and Palm Sunday, like many of you, we probably had already ordered our Palm Sunday strands, and the florist called and said, well, what do you want to do with these things? Shall we cancel it? And I thought, I'm not sure we should do that. Here, perhaps it's somebody else in other locations. The Episcopalians are the ones who have led the way with the sort of imposition of ashes on Ash Wednesday out on the curb. You might have heard of this in different places. Sometimes they call it ashes to go. And so I thought, you know what if we did palms from the front steps of the church? Now we're on Route 2, kind of the northernmost east-west highway up here. It comes in from Maine, through Gorham, over to Lancaster, and into Vermont. And so we're really, it's very nice location. And so we went down, we handed out strands of palms. Everything was shut down. This is a pretty busy street. It's the highway, and it's also Main Street, but people stopped, they took palms. And so it was kind of a cool thing to be able to do. And it was cool weather too. A couple of people said, well, next week is Easter. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, I guess we'll give out Easter lilies. So we did the Easter lilies. The third week, well, maybe we'll take a week off. People started emailing and asking, you guys didn't do anything last week. It's like, okay, well, on the fourth week of every Sunday of the month, or the last Sunday of the month, whichever it is, we gather food for the local food pantry. And so it's like, well, we can go stand out front and have people bring food in. So of course the building's still closed during this time. So we have online continuing weekly, and now we're starting to develop this drive-up blessing. And so every Sunday from that Sunday forward, basically from Palm Sunday forward, we've had this drive-up blessing out on the front steps of the church on Route 2. Initially during that pretty much 2 or 3 months where everything was closed, businesses closed, very quiet on the highway, but people driving by, some people bicycling by. And it was just a fascinating time to have the quiet, but also to have people very grateful. It kind of became a way for people to check in. And that was so important. Yes, we could check in, online. We could check in by email. We could check in by phone. We had all these ways that we were sort of used to being in touch, but that visual, I think, meant so much to folks. And so we sort of had the regular church folk who could do that. We had folk who were not able to be in a building anyway very easily, who now were able to kind of have a helper drive them to church and say hello. And so that was kind of an added thing for some of our church population. And then we also had people who, I think Gordon might have been in one of your early letters, were probably not really going to become, part of the church once COVID was over, when we got to fall and everything was set. Remember that thought? And so, but they became sort of friends on the front steps of the church. And so, and then we had people who kind of found us because we were out front. I've never been one who thinks in 5-year plans or 14-year plans, if I heard you right. But we never thought, hey, let's go out and stand in front of the church when church is over and wave at people. But since we were out there now and waving at people, they would stop and say hi. And so, the week a guy came by on his bicycle and said, Gloria Patra. I thought, now that's not your usual hello. So that was a couple who were retiring up here. And we do have people who retire up here in Gorham area because of the beauty of the mountains and such. And so we've had some new people that have decided this can be their church home as they come up into Upper New England. That as we then in early June made the decision where we have really almost no COVID to speak of, to go ahead and start testing the waters for meeting in person with mask, with alternate seating in the pews. And so we've had now this 3-part service. Now we have online continuing, we have on the drive-by blessings, and we added in communion then on the first Sunday of each month out front, and then now starting in June in person in the church. So that's kind of what we've been doing. It's getting a little bit cool weather-wise. I don't know how many more Sundays we'll be out front. We're gonna do it through October, and then we'll see if the snow drives us off the front steps or not. But that's kind of where we are with it.
Thank you, Bill. Maybe hot chocolate in there for a day or two. Or...
Well, you know, we do have someone, after about 3 or 4 weeks out front, someone said, Pastor, can we wheel the coffee cart out front? And I'm not one to say no when someone comes up with an idea. I said, if you can wheel the cart out while I'm greeting hello to, you know, people, that's fine with me. So yes, it's sort of become a fellowship time too. And people do greet each other out front. And we have also had a couple Sundays where someone said, can I play a guitar? Someone brought a keyboard and they stood out front and kind of spaced themselves out, sung. So yeah, there's sort of an impromptu nature to it that happens too. So come on up and we'll have some coffee. There you go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Folks, you could start writing your questions. We're going to let all our presenters speak and then we'll start tackling the questions, but we will try to get back around to them. We've talked about a ministry of caring. We've talked about a spiritual ministry. We're going to talk about ministry in the community when it comes to social justice. And Mark Koyama is going to talk to us about a couple ministries that have happened at United Church of Jaffrey, or at least initiated through United Church of Jaffrey.
Thank you, Gordon. So Gordon asked me to talk about 2 of the kind of social justice oriented actions that we've done at the United Church of Jaffrey. One was last year, and then the other, the kind of mass shooting vigil installation in front of our church took place last year. And then this year we've done the what we're calling the Sacred Ally Quilt Project, which has been happening this year. So let me speak briefly about the response that we had to the mass shooting, and then we'll move on to the Sacred Ally quilts. In the direct aftermath of the El Paso and the Dayton shootings, which we all remember as being a very dramatic and painful experience, coming really hard on the heels of each other, in which so many people died. Our church was praying about it during prayers, and there was just a lot of pain in the congregation, a lot of feeling that we had kind of come to a kind of a saturation point with the mass shootings that seemed to just be occurring on a kind of epidemic level. And there was this feeling that something, that we just had to do something. That feeling really started to kind of boil in the online chat group that we have for the church. You know, people were sending around emails saying, we must do something. And so I said, well, let's have a meeting and figure it out. Let's just call a meeting and see what happens. And for, you know, a small New Hampshire church, you call an impromptu meeting, and if you have 15 people show up, that's pretty darn good. And that's essentially what we had. We had, you know, a really good number of people show up, and there were a lot of ideas that went around the table about the initial reaction was very much just frustration and emoting about it. Finally, I think someone had sent around an email that had profiled a church. I think it was a church in Long Island a few years back that had put out crosses on their front lawn that were representative of all the locations in the United States where people had been killed. And so I came up with this notion of actually having an installation of white crosses on our front lawn, each cross to represent a person who had been killed in a mass shooting in that year of 2000. I guess it would have been last year, so 2019. And at that point, right after the Dayton and El Paso shootings, that number was around 283, I believe, something like that, which is a remarkable number. You know, so we did the thing that you would expect us to do. We got on Amazon and looked to try to find white crosses, and we found that they were prohibitively expensive, and they weren't the ones that we wanted. And this turned out to be a terrific thing, because what happened was it became this mobilization of the entire community to create these crosses, to build a little jig to make to get the contributions of wood, and to put them all together, and to paint them white, and to do all this. Became this extraordinary collaborative process that really brought the community together in an amazing way. And then we had this prayer action, what I called a prayer action, which was this. I was trying to subvert the notion that, you know, which had been kind of co-opted by the NRA, which was like, you're in our thoughts and prayers, and therefore we don't have to worry about it, kind of thing. Like, so the idea at that time was that like that the Christian response to the mass shootings were essentially, oh, we'll pray and we'll forget about it, kind of thing. And I was trying to subvert that notion, saying that prayer is actually an action. We can actually make this an action. So I called it a prayer action. And we stood out in front of the church, and we got these 283 crosses, and the whole community that was there kind of very slowly and solemnly kind of just hammered these crosses into the ground. And just the process of that was just so profound. And it took a long time, and it was good that it took a long time, because that taking a long time was something that was something that really transformed the experience from just this physical experience of nailing a piece of wood into the ground to this experience of like recognition that this was actually a living human soul that had been taken from us for, you know, for this absurd reason that we have, because we have these guns that can spray bullets at, you know, at 20 bullets a second or whatever it is. So so and the result of this was this installation on our front lawn of this multitude of white crosses. It was a very profound and just, you know, difficult thing to see when you come up Main Street in Jaffrey. And it was out there for you know, several months until the snow flew, and we realized we had to take them up. But it was a remarkable experience, and it was one with a great deal of symbolic resonance. That was a way in which we were able to kind of keep the discussion going in town with regard to mass shootings. Once again, if I'll switch here now to talk about the Sacred Ally Quilt Project, which in a sense really kind of conceptually somewhat grew out of the previous action, because I had realized from the white crosses that really one of the ways in which we can really grow our church and grow our Christian faith is by embracing kind of the symbolic resonance and of something and doing a creative project. I discovered through the crosses that this was gold as far as ministry is concerned, and as far as church community is concerned. And so I received it. This is a similar situation where it grew out of the pews because after George Floyd's brutal death, our church really kind of was ready to stop kind of beating around the bush. We wanted to make a statement. And so so again, the chat room kind of exploded, and by the end of the day, we had changed our church sign to Black Lives Matter. We had put a big black cross in front of our church sign. We'd put Black Lives Matter, and underneath we wrote, "Stop killing Black people." We were pretty unequivocal about our statement. And then someone contacted me and said, you know, if we can get a contribution of fabric, then I can make a big Black Lives Matter sign. And then as soon as I received that text, my brain started going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I thought, well, I've got a lot of people who like to sew in my church. And then I thought, well, this has been done before. We have the precedent of the AIDS quilt. And then I thought, what we really need is to have a narrative because quilts are a narrative in quality. And so I don't want to get lots of people sewing Black Lives Matter signs. I need something else. And then I received this email in my inbox from a kind of a left-leaning group that was trying to get my contribution to help with police reform. And in that email, in the body of the email was the lines of broken down of George Floyd's last words as he was pinned to the sidewalk. And I thought to myself, well, there it is. You know, this is the distillation of all of our kind of racial wounds right there in front of us in this horribly painful lines. And so the idea came to me that, you know, not only is my church full of people who like to sew, but churches all over are filled with quilters. There's this real demographic crossover here between quilting and church. And so, you know, I called Gordon, I called some other of my trusted mentors, and I said, is this a totally crazy idea? And they said, well, not really. And so I pitched the idea to the conference through the Racial Justice Mission Group and through other channels and Gordon helped me out. And in the end, we harnessed 9 churches all across the state of New Hampshire. And we broke those words, George Floyd's words, into 8 stanzas, and we put a quilt at the beginning saying George Floyd's last words, and a quilt at the end saying Black Lives Matter. So there's 10 quilts altogether. And all through the summer, these amazing quilters have been working on these quilts, and they're and we just recently brought them all together in September, and we blessed them at a blessing and dedicated them. And so now we have this incredible exhibit of just extraordinarily beautiful and painful quilts that will be doing the rounds of the churches in New Hampshire. First, they'll tour through the churches that were involved in the actual process of creating them, and then we will begin to look into different venues for how to move our quilts to other places so that they can be seen by other people. So what began as a creative project turned into this. Now we have this extraordinary exhibit that can move from place to place and give its painful and important message. So we've changed we're no longer the Sacred Ally Quilt Project. We are now the Sacred Ally Quilt Ministry, with the notion that the idea that we will continue to move this exhibit from place to place so that it can do its work of raising consciousness and creating allies through wherever it can go. So you can see both these projects really embrace the notion that the church is a fertile ground for harnessing symbolic meaning, and that's something that I was deeply moved by, and just the amazing participation of the community in both these projects has really been extraordinary. I hope I didn't take too much time. Sorry, Gordon.
You got to talk at least once when you're muted, just to make it a real Zoom meeting. And
yeah.
Thank you, Mark. So I am going to take a question or two until Rob steps back into a place where he has cell coverage. So I see a first question from Ruth Gowett, who was asking, I believe this is addressed to Bill, how are you doing the drive-by blessings?
How am I doing them? Well, we have our sanctuary worship at 10 o'clock, and when we're finished with that, I walk out to the front steps of the church, which are down on Highway 2, and usually by then there's a car or two already pulled up. Often it's a member of the church who can't come into the sanctuary yet, or maybe doesn't want to wear a mask at this time, and we'll have a brief conversation. I've got a mask on myself, and we'll check in a little bit on what they might want to pray for. Is it Anne Lamott who kind of had that prayer of please and thank you? I think she added a third word. I can't remember what it is for one of her thin little books. And so I'll just ask them what do they want to pray for? And then, or who do they want to pray for? And then we pray the Lord's Prayer. And I learned to have somebody with me, because sometimes they will offer a little donation. I heard someone say something about this is also a ministry and growth, and it is. But I don't try to figure out which pocket to put it into in my robe. So I have a church member who's not too far from me, follow along and follow up with, if they have something else they want to do, or hand off. And then I'll go to the next car and say hi. We have somebody who likes to bake. And so, we'll offer them some cookies or whatever. And that's basically what it consists of. If it's a communion Sunday, we have those little prepackaged communion things. And we'll usually, for communion, I'll have 2 or 3 people who didn't come in for the service inside, but who are there. And so they'll come join me alongside a car with someone who wants to have communion. And we'll have a very brief communion liturgy that we share with them.
So the next question is for you, Bill, but before we get there, I believe the book you're referring to is Help, Thanks, Wow by Anne Lamott.
There you go. Wow, I guess for the beauty of creation, I suppose. Or some kind of gratitude. Thanks.
So Christine Markroff asks, did you say that you have in-person worship?
Yes, we did.
Other folks have questions for any of our folks?
I have a question for Mark. Is that allowed?
Sure.
Okay, a cross-panel question here. I love the idea of the quilting thing going out among other churches, and just this sort of, it also makes me think about, I don't know about other people's churches who are listening in tonight, or maybe other panelist churches. Not everyone in all of our churches, or at least in my church, is on the same page with all the issues that we're in the middle of right now. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that something like what you're talking about is the kind of thing that I could certainly envision here, offering us a possibility that people could individually maybe thread into or link into somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but if there's a way going forward, if there's a website or something that folks could kind of maybe make a panel or contribute something somehow. I don't know how it grows, but so that it could be a way that, people can make their own sort of connection to this, and that continues the thread outward from the beginning that you all have made. And I love the fact that it comes around the state.
Yeah. Well,
it sounds like a great beginning, but like a quilt that kind of has the edges that continuing out. I'm sort of thinking about the fringes at the edge that now could go out from this beginning.
Right. Yeah. I like the way you're thinking. Yeah. And there's a manner in which, right, that all quilts have this narrative quality, and that the edge of the quilt doesn't necessarily have to be contained. It can move outwards. That there's all kinds of opportunities of other ways of thinking. But one of the quilts, I think it's quilt number 2, includes the faces of a number of individuals who have died in police custody. And one of the thoughts was that there have been a lot of people who have died in this way, and in a similar way, this the AIDS quilt. Those people could be memorialized as well. So there's other opportunities, there are other ways of thinking about this process. And the intention with this that I've tried to say over and over again is that this is about allyship. It's not necessarily about an indictment of law enforcement. It comes very much with the kind of with the intention of creating dialogue that moves towards reform, but it's also very intentionally set up as a kind of a spurring of allyship, and of continuing the time of reckoning that we're in right now in terms of race relations.
So we had a question about, do you have pictures of these beautiful quilts? And I actually have started looking for them. I don't quite have it yet, but I can put that up in just a moment. If anybody else has a question, it'll give me time to finish that search for the pictures.
May I do another cross-panel question?
Yes, please do. That'll give me the time I need. So.
I was fascinated, Judy, by the Seacoast Family Promise project, and because we are, as the weather gets cold again in Jaffrey, and every year we are confronted with the problem of homelessness. We are the one church in our community that has made the theological decision to leave its doors open, to the sanctuary doors open at all times. Now that's shifted a little bit with COVID, but as a result of that, over the years, as soon as the weather gets cold every year, we start getting transient populations that come in to survive, to make it through the night. And we're continually facing that struggle. And so I was really fascinated to hear about the solutions that your organization has come through. But it's fascinating to hear this, that they have to do a background check, and that it's always families and their kids and stuff. So it's a different demographic than what we're seeing. But.
Right. And, in this area where we are, Rockingham County, there are other shelters that are, maybe more appropriate for single folks. There aren't a lot that are just family-based. Which was, we saw the need for it. What really struck me, I remember going to one of my first workshops about the program, was when we were asked if we knew what the average age of homelessness was in the United States. And, I was teaching 4th grade at the time, and it was 11 years old, which is still a statistic I checked that before I would say it, but still a statistic, 11 years old. And a lot of times, you know, families aren't what we see with homelessness. You know, there are families living in their cars. There are families living with relatives in and out, or maybe hotels and going from one hotel to another hotel. Or families just that get stuck in situations. We recently had a call from a dad with 2 kids who just lost his 34-year-old wife to cancer. And when you have a catastrophic illness with no insurance, or, you know, you just never know, you know, there's a whole lot of people living 2 steps away from being in a situation that they can't manage. And the difference between this and a shelter, it's a program. So it really embraces the families and helps parents with parenting and helps them, you know, figure out financial things and how are we going to get the next job and how am I going to find daycare while I'm, you know. But I love the idea of you opening up your church, because that's how it starts, right? You get a few other churches, maybe in the geographic area, that form your own network of churches doing something similar. So.
Wow, terrific. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
So Mark, I am going to pull up some pictures of the quilts. We just had a question asked that I'm going to have you answer as we show them. Somebody asked, what are the churches that worked on them? And I figured as we show them, you can probably help answer that.
Okay, yeah.
And Rob, after that, you are up talking about your stuff. But we're going to show quilt pictures first, assuming I can pull this off. Are folks seeing a quilt picture?
Yes.
And that's Stratham right there, isn't it?
That is.
Yeah, that's Stratham's church. That's the quilt number 1, which is just the kind of the introductory quilt. A great story behind this quilt. Yeah, wonderful work going on. This is quilt number 2. I mentioned it earlier. It's the quilt that has the faces of all of many people who have died in this manner. And this is the beginning of the quote of George Floyd's last words. And this was what was it? That was Pelham Church. This is the work of Pilgrim United Church of Christ in Brentwood, Kingston. This is quilt number 3. It's also in the kind of the colors of the Ghanaian flag. Okay. This is quilt number 4, is the work of the United Church of Keene and quilters from Keene, and also it's a just beautiful work. These are so much more impressive in person. You got to see them in person. They're pretty impressive. This is the back of that was the back, and this is quilt number 5. This is the United Church of Jaffrey. This is our church. It's the longest of the quilts, and where it says "I'm claustrophobic," I cut those words out. It took me all day to cut them out. This is the back of the quilt. So this is quilt number 6. From the United Church, the Federated Church of Marlborough, and yeah, number 7. This is Wolfboro Church, and yeah, beautiful church. Here's the back of quilt number 7. Quilt number 8. This is the South Church of Concord South Church, South Congregational Church. And this is quilt number 9, again, also the work of the Pilgrim United Church of Christ, yeah, and Brentwood, Kingston. Largely, this is Harriet's, she calls it a watercolor. And you can see right at the very bottom of the final words of George Floyd says, "I can't breathe." Very, very profound quilt. And the final quilt, which you
I missed one, sorry.
No, it's all right. The final quilt, I think, is the Black Lives Matter quilt,
It is, yes.
which was the work of Wakefield United Church of Christ. Thank you.
Great. So we have one more presenter to talk a bit about the green team at the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College. Rob Grabill, will you tell us a little bit about that ministry in the community?
Absolutely. With the backdrop of all of these faith communities grappling with COVID and grappling with issues around racial justice, we had a group with the bandwidth and the energy to be focusing, not just during this time, but continuing to focus on the challenges of climate change and the climate crisis and the necessity of faith communities to rise up in response, in response to the clear scriptural warrant that we are stewards of God's creation. And there's been great leadership nationally from people like Brooks Barrett and people like the Reverend Jim Antall. And so we had members in our church community form a green team. And the support that exists nationally with the monthly newsletter, The Pollinator, and with the Kairos moments, all of this available on the UCC national website, we were able to follow the steps that they recommend for becoming a creation justice church. And in the process, we found that becoming a green church involves not only looking at ourselves and working internally, what we can do with our own church, with our own faith community, but also looking outwards as well. And so there were a number of projects that we've undertaken, a lighting audit that allowed us to replace a number of outmoded lights, not only saving energy, but giving us the opportunity to be an example for other communities. We are working on solar panels. There are a number of faith communities in New Hampshire that have made this examination. And of course, you can do a lot with solar. It's not limited to putting solar panels on your own roof. You can join in community solar and invest in solar projects that allow you to reap the benefits and to gain everything that comes from making the switch to renewable energy. And so we had a group that met very regularly to do this. And one of the most interesting things, and I think one of the things that made our green team very powerful is the age range. We go to a lot of climate meetings. I've been to a lot of climate meetings, and the median age is 70. And I look around and I go, wait a minute, where are the people who are going to solve this? And we are feeling very fortunate that we have young people in elementary school, people in middle school, people in high school, college students, and younger adults all working together. So they wrote a creation justice covenant, and they have now finished an application to the United Church of Christ to become a creation justice church. And if and when we are recognized, it will double the number of churches in New Hampshire from 1 to 2. But we're hoping for a geometric progression from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, and are conducting a number of webinars that have invited other churches to join us. As some of you are aware, there is a resolution on the rights of nature that's coming before the New Hampshire Conference's annual meeting. And if this resolution is considered successfully, there's a chance that it will be brought to the General Synod that's meeting virtually this summer. So the process of the Green Team has been very important to us. It's been an intergenerational undertaking. It's helped us look not just inward at ourselves, but also outward. There are a number of voting projects that we're now very, very interested in. We're working with Interfaith Power and Light. We're working with the New Hampshire Conference environmental justice ministry, and that ministry has been very supportive of local churches and of our effort. So the fact that climate change is a multiplier of other crises. It's a multiplier of refugee issues. It's a multiplier of hunger issues. It's a multiplier of racial justice issues. And so we have discovered that we can and must make room for that on our dashboard, in addition to these other pressing crises that faith communities are asked to consider.
Thank you, Rob.
That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. Well, friends, I was going to invite other questions, but I see that we're actually right at the end of our time. So let me just offer a few thoughts in closing. The first of which, well, let me start by doing the most important of which is to make sure that we take a moment to thank Mark and Bill and Rob and Judy for sharing the stories of the ministries that your churches are involved in. I am sure that's quite inspiring to everyone. And I'm going to use that to say the other thing. As we were putting together this roundtable, we wanted you to hear about some stories that some of our churches are doing in ministry in their community, to use that as a launch board to saying, part of our hope from this whole annual meeting experience, including tonight, is to ask all of our churches what in your community needs to be repaired, restored, and renewed, and how is your church going to be about that work? That's what we are hoping you're thinking about throughout our annual meeting activities all month long. Since I did mention annual meeting activities, let me just highlight a few things before I let you go. Rob mentioned the resolution on the rights of nature, which will be coming to the annual meeting. Our next connecting session actually will be a hearing on that resolution. That'll be held next Tuesday evening from 6 to 7. Our annual meeting, what we generally think of as the meeting, will happen on October 17th. Our business meeting will be in the morning from 9 to 12, and then in the afternoon from 1 to 2:30. We will have a very special time about talking about ministering to our community with the Reverend Michael Kane, who's our keynote speaker. Sunday, we have a worship service that is prepared to you. It'll actually be made available to churches a little earlier in the week if you want to use it as your worship service for Sunday, and it'll be made available in components if you want to use components of it in your worship service. This will also be left up if you want to use this worship service in weeks in the future. It doesn't have to be this Sunday. It'll just be available for this Sunday. And then our final two connecting sessions are conversations that you get to have with me. This is one of our traditional annual meeting connecting sessions, and we figured in 2020 there needed to be more than one opportunity because we have lots to talk about this year. So those will happen on next Sunday at 1 o'clock and the following Wednesday in this 6 to 7 slot. So thank you all so much for being with us. We're glad you were able to join us and start thinking about ministry in the community. And we hope you as churches will be about the work of repairing, renewing, and restoring. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Blessings.